Compass Mining and Navier are rolling out a new tool called HashTest that lets buyers and sellers sort of verify the advertised hash rate of an ASIC machine versus, how it's actually performing on a mining site. Now, this is interesting because that sort of data is not readily available. Mining companies have it, but they don't always sort of share it. And so for like your retail miner who might be buying a machine and having it set up at a mining, a mining location, they could be told one thing and the hash rate could actually be less, which affects obviously sort of their earnings in some ways, but also just a whole variety of things. So this is a really interesting tool that, Compass and Navier are sort of doing in a very open and transparent and independent way to try and just give retail miners and sort of even a secondary market of ASICs more information about how these machines are actually working versus just how they're advertised and working. But Naomi, as a miner yourself, I want to kind of turn this over to you for your thoughts.
Mine. As a miner, I have a football mat. I don't have a mining machine. And it's summertime, so that thing hasn't been going
Naomi
for,
is our
for many
resident
months now.
sports fan and miner.
That's right. Definitely sports desk here. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it was maybe a couple of months ago, I read a really interesting thread. I think it was on Zuko Wilcox's Twitter page, where they were diving into the specifics of like this underground world of mining and about how nothing is really clear and how there's a lot of sabotage against different groups. And there's sort of, there's coercion in there. There's, enforced monopolies with like using coercion with certain companies, sabotaging competitors and all that. Like it's kind of this very interesting world that I'm not at all involved in, apart from my foot warmer in the corner of my room, right? But it is fascinating because, like, if you ask the average person, who's getting into this, they're going to buy a machine. They think that what's on the packet is what they're getting. Most people in the mining world, they know exactly what their machines are capable of. They can reroute all kinds of things to increase input. Like the mining machines are a lot more malleable than people realize, and you can divert resource to all kind of different areas. It's just like this fascinating world that I'm only starting to dig into. I wish we had Will here to kind of dig into the mining side, being from Compass. But Zach, I'm going to throw to you. What are your thoughts on all of this?
It's sort of like the picks and shovels play of the picks and shovels sector, right? So you have these companies who are helping people optimize their mining operations. And I think this is a great tool. It should be accessible to folks, right? You want to know that you're getting what is advertised. And at its root, that's what this is. My understanding is that there's a lot of like back and forth of, selling sort of older models. There's a fairly high turnover in some of these high volume mining operations in terms of getting the latest machines. So there's a lot of, pre-owned machines kind of hitting the market. So the ability for people to have a tool that can kind of check to make sure everything's still functional is great, and should serve Bitcoin miners, both small and large. And again, this happens in the context of the hash rate migration heading out of China and into other markets, potentially machines hitting the market en masse relating to that crackdown. So the idea that this can help avoid fraud and foster honest dealing is super relevant, I think, especially in this time.
Can I ask a quick question, and then Ben can take it? So what I'm not clear on, does this remotely monitor a machine that's already operating that is the equivalent of something that you're going to buy? Is that how it kind of checks? Or can I guess, Ben, can you just kind of describe in more detail whatever we know?
Yeah, so there are a couple different things that go into it. Basically, there's a stratum URL that you get when a miner connects to a pool, and this thing kind of does a similar stratum URL or the HashTest gives you that for the miner itself. So when it gets plugged in, you're starting to see how it behaves versus how it's initially, before it gets plugged in, like it's being advertised.
So you're monitoring your own machine. Okay, got it.
Yes, you're monitoring your own machine here, and that's really important because that also, if you want to potentially resell it in a secondary market later, you could, demonstrate to the seller it actually functions. And I'm starting to dive a little bit deeper into the mining operations and how those exactly work. And Naomi, to your kind of statements, it gets really gray really quickly. There's a huge, a weird secondary market where sometimes miners are sold with scratched off serial numbers and stuff like that. And so it becomes a little bit dodgy. And this hopefully, and because sort of the information about performance is a little bit proprietary and companies aren't super open about that, this is a tool that can hopefully help to break down those barriers. Because I think, as we're seeing around the climate debate with mining too, right? More data is better in a lot of senses here. We just need this information in a lot of cases. And so this is kind of one step towards that. And, as I say in the piece, you can kind of think about it in some ways as like the Carfax of mining, right? Like you're just trying to answer this age-old conundrum between buyers and sellers of like, is what I'm getting actually work, and how is it vetted, and how can I see that? So it's like, it's a small tool, but I think it's one of these incremental professionalizations of the industry that could be really useful. But Naomi, I'll toss back to you.
Yeah, just to wrap up, I found the article I was referring to, The State of Cryptocurrency Mining. It's from a SIA blog, actually. They're talking about, Equihash, saying the manipulations you need to make to the data are simple enough. You can just merge memory and computation together. Like, it basically outlines all of these quick fixes that, people who think that they're buying a mining equipment, or if they're doing something that's ASIC resistant, it turns out that a lot of miners are able to be manipulated, that, you can get around all of that stuff. It's just a super interesting world. So I'm excited to read more about what you're diving into there, Ben.